The scripture reading today is from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to chapter 5, verses 15, in the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in a boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And waking up, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Be silent, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And when they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain, for he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the region. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, stampeded down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man possessed by demons sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they became frightened. May God bless these words to our understanding.
I'm going to start with the same question I started children's time. Who here has found themselves caught in the midst of the storm? There's many things I can think of. Winter highway, and whiteout condition. The first summer I was at camp. First summer I worked at camp, and the end of the first week, and it had been 25 plus and muggy all week. And you know eventually it's going to break. And we had, that would have been 74, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. Folks from Wahilo would come over for campfire that night. There was an older camp, but they came over, and the storm hit. Luckily, we'd already planned an indoor campfire, because we knew the storm was coming. And trees fell. They had to take the chainsaw out so the folks from Wahilo could get back to the camp. It's scary. It's scary to be caught in the storm. So I think of those disciples in the boat, having made what is maybe a questionable choice. Evening is not the time one normally prudently decides, well, let's go across the lake. Especially Lake Galilee, which is known to blow up storms quite viciously and quickly. And they're heading across the lake, and the storm blows up. And they're afraid. And not only are they afraid, but these are fishermen. These are fishermen who know the lake. It's one thing if somebody who's never been in a boat before gets in a bit and there's a bit of chop and they start to get afraid. That's one thing. But for people who live on the water, to be afraid for their lives because of the storm, that tells you something. And fishing communities all have those stories. You don't talk to many people from the outports of Newfoundland before you hear the story of the big storm, or when their neighbor got caught, or when the other one didn't come back. People who live on the water know the power of the storm, which, if I remember correctly, is the genesis behind Eternal Father, Strong to Save. And I only know that because Emily chose it and told the story of it for one of the services Allison did. Storms are scary. Sometimes even when you're inside the house watching through the picture window. Another memory. When Sarah was a baby, the first summer, Sarah was a baby. And a major hailstorm, like hail, that size hail, came through Atikokan. And I've always loved to watch the storm. I've loved to be sitting on the beach and watching the lightning flash on the other side of the lake. So I was standing right by the picture window where the prevailing wind was driving the hail, watching the hail fall, while Patty was standing on the other side of the room, right almost in the other next room, holding Sarah and saying, "Dad's being foolish. We're going to stay over here where it's safe." Storms are scary things, sometimes even when you know that you're in a safe place. And so the disciples wake Jesus up, and I can understand their confusion. How is he sleeping through all this? We're afraid for our lives, and he's having a nap. Don't you care? Jesus wakes up, takes a look around, and says, "I got this. Stop. Put your hand in the hands of the man who stilled the waters. Put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the seas." The old song goes. "Stop," he says. And the waves and the wind calm down. Then he turns to his friends and says, "Why are you afraid?" And he goes back to sleep. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? What? Even the wind and the water obey him? One of the themes in Mark's gospel is this question of authority. Who is this guy that even he has the power to stop the forces of nature? One storm, calmed. I maintain that storms come in a variety of features, not just thunder and lightning and wind and snow and hail. I would say our second story today, that second part of the reading, is also about a storm. As the translators and the scholars have broken up Mark, it's easy to assign it as a healing story. It is a healing story. And the rest of Mark chapter 5 are healing stories. We'll hear some of them next week. But I think it's about a storm. Jesus comes upon a man who is tormented. They can't control him. The demon which is in him is so strong that breaks chains. And Jesus has this little discussion with the demon. And because Jesus has the authority to calm the storm, and somebody caught in the midst of possession, somebody caught in the midst of what we would now call a mental health crisis, is caught in a storm. Not of their own making, not something they can control, but they're caught in a storm. Their lives are buffeted by forces they can't control. And Jesus calms this storm. And everybody comes back and says, what happened? How did this happen? Put your hand in the hand of the one who stilled the water. Put your hand in the hand of the man who calmed the sea. All of our hymns today, all three of our hymns today, which I said are nautical, to go with the stealing of the storm, all come from the section of the hymn book, which are hymns of trust. They all come from that section of the hymn book, which are hymns of trust. Our challenge when we're caught in the midst of the storm is to trust. Even when we're pretty sure that Jesus is asleep at the back of the boat and doesn't really care what's going on. I understand where Peter and the others could feel a little bit abandoned as Jesus is napping through this storm that's tossing the boat back and forth. Even then, we are called to trust. And it's hard. One quote I found a few weeks ago and then quickly printed it off because it's Facebook and you can never find something again. Because this is, I think, a relevant interpretation of how Jesus sometimes comes to us in the midst of the storm. It's building off the song from a few years ago about Jesus Take the Wheel, which is a song about somebody who's caught in the midst of an icy road and Jesus takes the wheel. Jesus brings her home. Jesus wouldn't take the wheel. Jesus would let Peter drive. He'd fall asleep in the back seat, wake up to the sound of the other 11 screaming in mortal terror, while Peter bellows expletives at the car in front, and get them out of the fatal car accident at the very last second by rebuking the speed limit. Sometimes Jesus doesn't approach the storm in the same way we think he should. And sometimes he's a little late to the party because he's asleep in the back seat. But we're still called to trust in the one who can rebuke the storm. I've got lots of songs. You might have noticed I like to think through songs sometimes. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship upon the sea, thou who rulest wind and water, stand by me. In the midst of tribulation, stand by me. When the hosts of hell assail and my strength begins to fail, thou who never lost a battle, stand by me. The old hymn which was quoted in our opening prayer. And for the music, from the musical Carousel by Rodgers and Hammerstein. When you walk through the storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of the lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. I invite you to think back to the various storms you've encountered in your lives, because none of us gets through life without a storm or two. Very rarely do we get through a year without a storm or two. Sometimes a month. So think back on the storms you've encountered in your lives, either the ones that are outside in the wind and the rain, or the ones that are more interior, in your soul, in your mind, in your life. Those things that have tossed you around and made you feel out of control. How do you get through it? There's no one answer to that question. There's no one answer to how we get through the storm. But as people of faith, we're called to trust in the one who has the power and the authority to still the storm. It may not happen as fast as we want. It may not happen exactly as we picture it. We might have to wake him up first. But we're called to rely on the one who can still the storm. The question at the back, and I'm planning on actually coming up with questions for all the weeks between now and when I go on holidays to spur our sermon thinking. A couple people said things like physical ailments is a storm that life throws at us sometimes. Another put separation and divorce. And one of the things that helped them get through that storm was this place. Not this place is in this building. This place is in these people. When we understand ourselves to be the community who God has called together, sometimes God works through us to help still the storms in the lives we share. It's not that we're stilling the storms. We may think we have absolutely nothing to do with helping somebody get through a time in life which is utterly horrific. How many of us have been told in the aftermath, I couldn't have done it without you, and we're left thinking, what did I do? As people of faith, we trust in the God who works in various ways, sometimes even through these flawed things we call humans, to still the storms in the lives around us. We will meet storms. There's no way out of that. We will meet storms. We will be buffeted and blown around and be sure that we're about to be overwhelmed. God promises to be with us in the storm. You'll never walk alone. May God help us in the calm, easy sailing. And may God help us when the storms overwhelm us. Amen.